Thank you so much for joining us today for our interview series, Professor Broderick. So you teach the Bayesian Modeling and Inference course 6435 in MIT numbers. Could you talk a little bit about how you got involved teaching the course and what was your favorite part about it?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me for this interview. So I got involved with 6435, Bayesian Modeling and Inference, as you say, because I do a lot of research in this area of machine learning, Bayesian machine learning. So maybe just a little background, Bayesian machine learning is really good for cases where we really care about things like uncertainty. We want to know not just what do we know, but how well do we know it? It's probably most famously used by Nate Silver for election predictions. And so I think that's how a lot of people might have at least a little familiarity with it, although it's certainly used in a lot of other applications in the sciences and technology. So anyway, I'm interested in Bayesian modeling from a research perspective. And so I really wanted to teach a graduate course in it. But I had another big motivation, which is if you think about the way that knowledge sort of gets imparted to people, there's sort of a pipeline. Like people do research, and in the course of doing research, they learn something, and then they turn it into a paper, like a research paper, and they publish it. And then once you have enough papers and, sort of there's a scientific consensus, that usually turns into some kind of book, and then you can have like a course about that book. And somebody could teach from that book and all the details. And it's really interesting because when you're a graduate student and when you're doing research, you don't even have to be a graduate student, just anybody doing research, you're sort of participating in the first part of this pipeline. So you're taking things that you find, you're turning them into papers, which are further sort of digested down the line. And so it's really important to understand, what these papers are like, because I think when you're early in your career, you've really only engaged with textbooks. And where everything has sort of already been digested. Like you might find a typo in a textbook, but there's nothing that's sort of in question. Whereas when you're dealing with papers, the scientific consensus often hasn't been reached yet. And so you have to read them in this much more critical way. You have to really think about, what do we know in this paper, but what also don't we know? And trying to figure that out is a whole new skill. And so in this class, we're not only learning about Bayesian modeling and inference, like learning from data using these Bayesian tools, but we're really learning about how to read papers and how to engage with science on the cutting edge and machine learning on the cutting edge. And so something that I just absolutely love about the course is that it's very heavily discussion based. Like there's a lot of discussion among the students, and the students are like an absolute joy. I feel like every time I've taught this course, just the insights that people have and the questions that they have and the discussions that we have just make it like a super fun course. I mean, it's very challenging in that respect too. You can't just sort of get up there and give a lecture and everything is like, decided in advance. But I just think it's like so fun to get that feedback and really like talk through ideas with students. And so I really like both aspects of the course. The material, obviously, I mean, there's so many interesting questions in Bayesian inference, how do we do things fast? How do we make it easy for the user? Sort of a lot of the typical questions that we have in machine learning. How do we set up appropriate models for different types of data problems? But I think also just engaging with the research enterprise and reaching that sort of deeper maturity in understanding what do we know and what don't we know on this sort of level of human knowledge, which is cool.
That's really interesting to hear about how you teach that course. So shifting gears here, it seems like a lot of excitement about deep learning lately has been focused on supervised learning, but many of your efforts are around creating scalable unsupervised learning. Could you talk a little bit more about your research there?
Yeah, so actually, maybe let me just start by talking about my research, and then I'll get into some of those questions. So as I was sort of intimating a little bit, my research often focuses on uncertainty and robustness, and that can be Bayesian, but it doesn't have to be Bayesian. And I'll maybe give an example. I think this is about not just what do we know, but how well do we know it. So like, let's say that I was really interested in learning about, some proposed new system for a plane and its engines. I don't just want to say like on average this plane will take off. Like if I say, oh, it'll take off with 70%, I would be really upset about that, right? Like that's not like an acceptable certainty level for an airplane to take off. Or, to have a safe flight with 70%. So this is a case where we really care about not just some sort of, rough prediction or best case prediction, but really saying how well, how certain are we that something's going to happen? Or, on the other hand, if I'm like just typing a text to a friend, I can make some mistakes in that, and that doesn't matter so much. And so, a lot of times when we're thinking about learning something in science, we want to know not just what is some physical constant, but how well do we know that physical constant? If we're talking about the social sciences, maybe like for instance, we have a collaborator who's really interested in microcredit, these small loans to individuals in impoverished areas and whether they're really helping people. And so there, if you're saying, oh, I think this small loan, helps people by giving them an extra $3 purchasing power parity every few weeks. Well, okay, is that $3 plus or minus, 10 cents, in which case, at least it's a positive effect and you know that. Or is it $3 plus or minus $100, in which case, maybe it's actually really hurting people and you don't know. And so you really want to get a sense of that. I think also we're really interested, or I'm really interested, and then I run a research lab. I'm really interested in sort of how do you draw conclusions? So again, thinking about microcredit or any study that you might do in parts of the world, you might ask, okay, well, maybe I learned that microcredit helped people in this particular study, or some other societal intervention, maybe that was related to drinking water help people in this particular study. But is that like a general thing that I can trust? If I ran this in different studies, usually we're trying to say something very general about like, oh, this intervention will work for other people. It will help them, with their drinking water or their, livelihoods or what have you. And so we want to ask sort of how robust are our conclusions. If they're very sensitive to our assumptions, then maybe we don't trust them quite as much. So I'm very interested in these kinds of things. Bayesianism is one tool for this. It's sort of this really nice framework that lets us build models that can incorporate expert information and sort of naturally using Bayes' theorem and language of probability give us really good uncertainties that have nice properties. But this comes up in a lot of other ways too, and I'm certainly not, only doing things in the Bayesian framework. So a really common example for anybody who's sort of familiar with the basics of machine learning is cross-validation. This is a way of sort of understanding, evaluating what we're doing, seeing at least some notion of robustness. So in cross-validation, you sort of leave out little bits of your data points or little parts of your data points at a time and use that to predict given what you've learned on the rest of your data. And an interesting thing about cross-validation is that especially for these modern complex models, like you just mentioned deep learning, but there are plenty of other very, complex and often very slow models that we try to fit, that can be really expensive. You already have this very expensive, computationally expensive data analysis, and now I'm asking you to run it, maybe tens of times, if not hundreds or thousands. And there are reasons to think that the more expensive versions of cross-validation are actually better. And if you're already at the edge of your computational power, that's going to be very difficult to do. And so one of the things we've been working on recently is, can we approximate cross-validation in a way that's, still accurate, still giving us what we want, but very fast and equally easy to use and like conceptually easy and things like that. So I'm really interested in understanding these uncertainty of robustness and scalability. That certainly takes the form of both supervised and unsupervised learning. I think a really interesting thing about deep learning that I think, for anybody who's in the field to really have a good grasp on is that deep learning is super cool and it's able to solve a lot of really neat new problems, but I would consider it a tool in the toolbox. So in machine learning, I like to think of us as developing tools for people who have really important, cool data problems, and making their lives easier so they don't have to worry about those tools. They can just get down to the like awesome science or economics or whatever it is they're doing. And so something that's really interesting is that like deep learning is really good at certain things, but there are other tools that are also really good, usually at complementary things. So something that there are a lot of things I like about 6036, the other class that I taught last year and which you're familiar with. And one of them is also the really awesome interactions with students. But another one is, so there's this project component that some people can take for graduate credit if they do a project in addition to the usual coursework. And something that I find really interesting is in this project, a lot of people are really surprised to find that things like linear models can be extremely effective. And I think that anybody who works in an applied context, if they're doing applied work, at a technology company, or they're really trying to get an answer about some sort of scientific problem, there's so much. There's so many times that people will turn to linear models and their generalized linear models or generalized linear mixed models because they're so interpretable and they're often actually really good in the types of problems that people have in practice. Another example is actually random forests. If somebody, even if somebody really just cares about predictive power, random forests blow a lot of things out of the water and they're very easy to use. And this is just like a really small subsample. There are so many other models and things that people use. And so I guess I think of it as being, we're all working on this toolbox. And my research works on, some corner of the toolbox. Deep learning is another corner. Not that I want to say those are totally separate, but I don't do quite as much, that's related to deep learning. But then there are so many other corners too. Like there are kernel methods, which are super cool. There are all these different tools that people are developing.
Interesting hearing about your toolbox analogy. I've noticed that some of your work has been used to analyze tumors. Do you have an application area of your work that most excites or intrigues you?
Yeah. So first of all, that's very cool that you know that. And then I'll also say, I think, just as a precursor, one thing that I love about working in machine learning, and that's like just a huge plus to me, is how much you get to work with people in different application areas, and also how much you get to kind of flit around. Like, it's really fun to me. Some people describe it as like you get to play in everybody's backyard. Like I've just been so lucky to be able to collaborate with people in physics, in social sciences, in politics, and lots of areas. One application that I'm super excited about right now is actually something that I started kind of ages ago, but recently have picked up again with an undergraduate at MIT. We're doing research together. So basically, it's this system that lets people who have severe motor impairment. So suppose we're imagining people beyond quadriplegic. Beyond paraplegic and quadriplegic, they have something like locked-in syndrome where they can only move a single muscle, or cerebral palsy, or something where they have a very, very limited range of movement. And so we're imagining that again, they can like maybe activate a single muscle and that's it. Like maybe they don't even have the ability to do something like Morse code where they can control activation. So they might have like a sit puff switch, or they're blinking, or what have you. And there's some really, sort of famous examples of this. So I don't know if you would have ever heard of the book or movie Diving Bell and the Butterfly, but the French editor of Elle very famously was in a car crash and then suffered from locked-in syndrome. And of course, there's Stephen Hawking, and there's other famous examples. So anyway, okay, so when you get in this situation, how do you write? How do you do anything? And something that's really fascinating is that apparently in this book movie Diving Bell and the Butterfly, what happened was this guy had this person, another person, who would read the French alphabet to him in frequency order, but still, and he would like blink when they got to the part that he wanted. And there's just so much that's problematic about this. So first of all, a lot of times you want to talk and somebody isn't there. And there have been documented cases of people who they'll be in a wheelchair and their hand will be burned or something because they are, maybe against a radiator or something, and they just want to say something. But if nobody's actively prompting you, what do you do? And so this seems like a case where you really want things to be automated with a computer. And then second of all, this is a super inefficient way of talking. So, what if you want the letter that's at the end? You're going to have to wait through all the other letters to get to it. Like that's not a really good idea. Now, there are other alternatives nowadays, but they're not, at least they're automated. I think that's the huge boon. But they still have some inefficiencies. So a very common thing that people do is called the grid, and it highlights a row, and then it highlights a row, and it highlights a row. And you sort of have to go through every row and then every column. And if you want something down here, it takes a long time to get to. And so anyway, we have this method. It's actually based on Bayesian inference that lets people only look at the thing that they want to on the screen. So that's very helpful for people who can't easily change where they're looking on the screen. It automatically learns how people click. So if you're, very accurate in the way that you make your selections. Like if you have a sip puff switch and you're just super accurate about how you activate that switch, then it will go very fast and it'll be very, you'll just go through and type very quickly. But if you're very inaccurate, which a lot of people in this population are going to be very noisy in how they click, or use their switch, then it learns that and it gives them more time and more space. It also super efficiently uses their clicks, and so they don't have to, do as many switch activations, so that they can, select things very easily. And then something that's really cool is that it basically relies on having these little clock indicators at anything you might want to choose. And so you could put those next to letters and you could put them next to word completions, but you could also literally fill the screen with them and then draw by just like connecting points. And that's actually something that we've done, make a drawing program, and it's very efficient. You don't have to, do too many clicks, even when the whole screen is full. And so anyway, so right now, what's really cool is, not only is this a project that like we've been developing and put together, but actually we are collecting data on this. So we're actively working with a charity that works with individuals who have these motor impairments, but also we're doing a lot of experiments on able-bodied individuals, to make sure that, things are working, and, make sure that it's like a good experience to use the software. And this is all with this super cool undergrad that I'm working with, Nicholas Bonacker. Yeah, it's just, I think it's really fun. It's like the one thing, usually we're collaborating with people who have the data, who are experts in that area. And that's super fun, and I really enjoy that as well. But I think this is kind of fun because like we're collecting the data, and that's an interesting process in and of itself. And it's interesting to see that and do that.
Exciting to hear about all the work you've done. Now let's talk about your trajectory. Could you talk about what got you into ML?
Yeah, so when I was getting started, everything was so different than it is now. Like ML wasn't like this cool thing that everybody knew about. Like I think like nobody knew about it. So it's very different. So basically, so what happened to me was I had a few different interests when I was an undergrad. I was super interested in astrophysics. And so I was actually doing some research in astrophysics. So there were these cool questions like, okay, there's all this matter that we can detect in the universe, and in particular matter that we can see. So all the matter that we can see is sort of light or baryonic matter. But then you get these sort of gravitational effects that you can sort of see are happening. And so, people posit there must be some other type of matter, let's call it dark matter. And then if you even account for all of the dark matter and all the light matter in the universe, there still seems to be something else going on. And people basically were like, oh, let's call that dark energy. And so my research back in the day was talking about, can we characterize dark energy? What can we learn about it? Can we characterize dark matter? What can we learn about it? And it was super cool, and I loved it. And I think astrophysics is super fun. But something that came up in the course of doing it was we were looking at things like Markov chain Monte Carlo and Fisher information, and basically all of these ideas that are essentially like data science, machine learning, statistics. And at the time, I felt like I didn't understand these, and I was like, man, I really wish I knew like what exactly these tools were doing. I mean, I understood them enough to use them, but not sort of at a deeper level, and I really wanted to know that. At the same time, I was taking a lot of math classes, and I really liked analysis, real analysis and complex analysis, and measure theory. I was super into measure theory. And so I went to the undergrad advisor and I said, hey, what can I do with this? Like, can I, get into measure theory somehow? He's like, no, that's dead. You can't do that, but you should check out probability. That's like, it uses measure theory and it's cool too. And I was like, okay, I'll check that out. And then at the same time, we actually had this one like very niche course on machine learning that like nobody, like very few people took, because again, it was not a thing back then. And I took it and I was like, oh, this seems really cool. I'd like to do something like this, but the course that I took like wasn't as mathematical as I wanted. I think I wanted something a little bit different. And so, I mean, it was great. I loved it. But it was like, I was still trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. And so I actually went to England for a couple of years at this point. So I graduated from undergrad. I still was like, man, I like math, I like physics, I like computer science. I'm not sure what to do with my life. And so I was like, okay, I'll go to England for a couple of years. So I went on one of these like Bring Americans to England scholarships. And there I discovered basically that Bayesian machine learning was like exactly what I was looking for. Like it was what we had been using in some of this astrophysics work. It was very deep in terms of the math that you could get into. And it was this super cool data analysis discipline. And I was like, man, this is perfect. It's totally what I want to do. And so at that point, I applied to go to graduate school for my PhD, and I was like, I want to do a PhD in this Bayesian machine learning stuff. And in particular, there's this sub area called Bayesian non-parametrics that I was and am really interested in. Sort of very flexible. It lets you learn more as you get more from your data, or as you get more data. And so I applied for that, and I got in, and then basically like that's how I got into machine learning. And then at some point during my PhD, I think is when like machine learning took off as a discipline, and it was very popular. So it was good timing.
That's a super interesting background. And this leads on to our next question. Can you talk more about how your experience studying in Cambridge has shaped your approach in your research?
Yeah. So I mean, one big thing that it shaped was just discovering Bayesian machine learning. So I guess this happened in a few different ways. So one was I was looking for somebody to do research with. You know, I was sort of asking around, like, hey, is anybody who'd be willing to do some research with me? And I found a couple of people who were both fantastic. So I was able to do some work with Dave Mackay. And that's actually where I started this project that I was talking about just a moment ago on this assistive technology. So I started that when I was working in his lab. And then I also started working with Bobby Gramercy, who was at Cambridge at the he's since moved where he's a professor. And we were working on Gaussian processes projects. So Gaussian processes are these super flexible supervised learning methods, and like they're super cool. And I love them both. And I was like, wow, this is really neat. I want to do something like this. And that really turned me on, you know, and made me understand like that this Bayesian stuff was really cool. I also took, so I was doing part 3 of the maths tripos the first year I was there, and I took a bunch of statistics courses, and I was like, oh yeah, like this is so great to have like way more data analysis courses than I've been used to. And so that was really neat, because again, like there wasn't like so much of a machine learning curriculum anywhere at the time, at least the places I was at. And so it was really cool to see, you know, more of these things. And so I think, well, certainly all of that led me to apply to the PhD programs that I did and to get into the areas that I did. And I think it was super formative. Also, Cambridge is just really cool. Like it's, you know, I mean, this is very cliche, but it's very like Harry Potter. You know, like everybody dresses in robes to go to dinner. And there are all these, it's really interesting. There are all these different colleges in Cambridge, and it's very different from the US system, or what I had experienced of it, because they're all kind of autonomous, and they all have their own like fancy dress robe dinner thing. And so I would like try to go to all of them, like get my friends at different colleges to invite me. And it was a really fun time. It's like a super beautiful campus too. And like, you'll just run into cows and stuff.
That sounds like a wonderful time. Now let's talk about your experience before coming into college. You attended the MIT Women's Technology program in high school, which I attended too. Could you talk a little bit more about your experience there?
That's so cool that you went too. I love that. Yeah, it was amazing. So I was so lucky. I was actually in the first year they ever had that, which is like very exciting. And it's weird to think how long it's been now. But it was amazing. I mean, I just think what was fantastic about it for me was seeing all of these really cool ideas that I had totally not been exposed to before. So certainly like computer science, I think just wasn't a thing in high schools back then. And so being exposed to like computer science and the math that goes into computer science was just really great. The projects we had were so fun. I loved them. Like the counselors were fantastic. I remember very vividly that we had a couple of big projects at the end. So one was developing, building these Lego systems to biopsy a grape in Jell-O, and you had to like just go into the grape but not past the grape. And I think my partner and I won like this big comfy MIT sweatshirt from it, which was fun. And then actually this is really cool. So my partner from my motor experiment, which I think is still a thing, that like they still make the motors, she kept the motor for years, and then I think just within the past year or two she sent it to me, and so I like still have our motor, which is amazing. It's just really cool. And on that note, something that I think is really cool is I've really kept in touch with a lot of people that I met from that program, even though it's ages ago. And it's really cool how a lot of them have stayed. In fact, I think all of them have stayed broadly in STEAM. So some of them have gone into the medical profession. My partner from my my motor project, I think, is now sort of investor in tech. But, you know, all sort of in that space. And then of course, you know, some work at like Google and Microsoft and stuff like that. But it's just really interesting to see, you know, how far we've come and what we've done. Also, it was really fun. I think it was a little bit of a free for all because it was the first year. So we like went on all kinds of like crazy adventures, and, you know, they just let us, you know, hang loose and do all kinds of fun things. But I, you know, I remember, you know, even the activities were just amazing. Like we would go like whale watching or go to the Boston Pops and get dim sum and stuff. And it was just like super fun. Something I love now is that I get to go and talk to the students at it over the summer and tell them what it's like to sort of be in computer science and be in machine learning. And the most fun part is, so I'll be giving this talk and I'll be like, oh yes, I'm in machine learning and it's fun. And then I'll show them the picture of me and my friends from WTP. Like we have a picture of like all of us at, you know, WTP back in the day. And I'm like, no, you were at a WTP, that's crazy. And it's very cute. Yeah, but I like love going back, and it's like such a great crowd.
Shifting gears here, so for any students interested in learning more about ML and pursuing work in the field, do you have any thoughts on whether students should start on the theory side or begin with an applied project and fill in the gaps, or some combo of both?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I personally feel like you really just can't go wrong by following your interests. So, you know, there's so much work to be done on both sides. So if you're very applications inclined, there's almost no application you can think of right now that would not benefit from ML. And so, you know, you can really reach out. I think there's a lot of interest, you know, even just at professors at MIT outside of the computer science department or in different areas of computer science or ECS. You know, a lot of interest in working with students and, you know, doing research with students and applying those techniques. And I think it's just a really useful skill set. And so I think that's fantastic. And you really learn about why these techniques matter. Because I think that's something that is so important to keep in mind, is that the point of machine learning is that it's in many ways a service discipline. Like we're providing tools for other people. And so, you know, getting to see those tools being used up close is a really important thing. Conversely, the foundations of ML, what really makes machine learning work, are math. You know, it's just fundamentally things like probability, linear algebra, optimization, all of these tools. And so, you know, having that background can just be so impactful for being able to really understand what's going on with machine learning, like what it's doing, what it's able to accomplish. One thing I will say is I think that it is a really good idea, whether you're going to focus on theory, which is great, or you're going to focus on applications, which is great, to at some point just work on some kind of applied project. Like it doesn't have to be your focus, but just something to get that experience of working with somebody who really cares about a particular application, like somebody who is really like focused on that application. So not somebody who is a machine learning person like me, but like somebody who really is like the application person. Because I think it really gives you a sense of what are we trying to accomplish with machine learning? Like what is the goal? Because even I do plenty of super theoretical papers, like papers that are totally probability theory, for instance. But even in those, I really think the point of good theory is ultimately downstream to enhance the applications, to better, you know, make people understand what's going on with the applications, to make people understand, you know, the right way to use machine learning tools and so on. And so having experience of applications is really useful because then you understand what's the important theory and like, why does this matter? And so I think it's just good to like have some experience in that domain.
That's some great advice. Finally, do you have any advice for younger students interested in this field?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think one really big thing is to just like follow things that you're passionate about, right? I mean, I think in many ways, machine learning is this extremely versatile field. Like I was just saying, you know, you really can work with anybody. Like if you like astrophysics, if you like biology, if you like chemistry, if you like engineering, like any type of engineering, if you like the social sciences, like you can totally do something in any of those fields. So I think that's, you know, something to take advantage of. Like if there's something you're really interested in, you can do it. If you are interested in an applied field, I think it's really worthwhile trying to spend some time actually learning about that field. You know, like if you're interested in applications in a particular area, like really learn that area because they're going to have a lot of insights. And I think it's what's really impactful in machine learning is the melding of two different ideas. So maybe those ideas are machine learning tools with some kind of application area. Maybe those ideas are some really cool area of math to develop new machine learning tools. But I think it helps to have some diversity in the way that you're thinking and your background and things like that. And so I think that's worth going after. And I guess I would just repeat, the idea that I was suggesting before is just trying, something on a real application. Again, even if you're a super theoretical person, which I totally respect, and I think that that's great, but just getting some sense of working on a real application, because I think there are a lot of things that we just don't expect. And then in doing so, we learn like, oh, this is what really matters to this person. Like every time I've ever worked with somebody who is applied in an applied field, which I've been very lucky to do, I always learn, I'll say like, oh, how about we just do things this way because that's standard? And they're like, well, actually, I don't care about that. I care about this thing over here. And then that's an opportunity to develop, new machine learning methods and, new things that can help people. And so I think that that's really cool. Also, just taking advantage of collaborations is really cool. I mean, I think that that's like a fun thing to do.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and advice, and thank you all for watching the video.